What is good, all of you beautiful people out there? How y'all doing today? That is fantastic. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Double Diesel Sports Podcast, where we will be doing an NFC North division preview as we head into the 2023 National Football League season. Very interested to talk about this division today, but before we do so, I like to ask, if you have not already, please like, subscribe, and share the video if you have not done so already. Really helps boost the channel, get us out to more viewers, more eyeballs. So if you have not done that and you would like to, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, if you have not, go support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Double Diesel Sports. If you like to support the channel, help put food in my belly, that would be greatly appreciated. If you'd like to, of course, that link will be in the description down below. But let's get on with the show. So, the NFC North, this is a very interesting division. This a division Aaron Rodgers is no longer part of, so this is the first time in a while where it does truly feel like the division is completely wide open. It's up for grabs for any of these four teams to take. But that's not to say that there isn't the potential for some elite players to come out of this division for sure. And we are going to go through this division position by position, ranking each teams 1 through 4. We're doing this for all 8 divisions going into the season. And we're going to start off with the quarterback position. And this is, when I say this is a very interesting division and has the potential to really have some true upside, this is really the personification of that, because this is the current ranking right now, but it has the potential to be completely flipped by the time season is over. Right now, my number 1 quarterback in this division is Kirk Cousins, and that's really because he's the most proven out of all these guys at the moment. You know, Kirk gets a really unfair rep because, you know, he is a quote-unquote system quarterback, and, you know, he doesn't have this crazy upside, and, you know, your ceiling's kind of capped with Kirk Cousins. It's kind of like what you see, what you get. And, you know, the Minnesota Vikings are, you know, throughout his entire time here, have been kind of stuck in quarterback purgatory. He is sort of, when you think of the mid quarterback, you know, Kirk Cousins is the first thing that comes to mind. But that's not to say that he's not a bad quarterback. You know, he is a system quarterback, but when you give him the right pieces around him and you give him a chance to properly succeed, he will make the most of it, and he will succeed, and he will play like a top 10 quarterback. I know that's not the popular opinion to say, but he can. He has the ability to do so. It's just, you know, Vikings fans are fed up with him because, like I said, he doesn't have any physical upside, and once the play breaks down, you know, he's kind of screwed. He's just going to throw it away or just take the sack. And, you know, that's very frustrating for Vikings fans, especially when you see, you know, guys in the NFL now like Mahomes, like Allen, like Hurts, where when the play breaks down and they're causing chaos and they're able to have the athleticism to run around and try and make a play down the field. Kirk doesn't have that ability. He's in that tier with guys like the next guy, number 2 on this list, Jared Goff, who is the exact same thing almost. Where I will say Jared Goff has more physical talent than Kirk Cousins for sure. I mean, after all, you're talking about a former number 1 overall pick in Jared Goff. He has arm talent galore. Like, he has probably one of the more beautiful deep balls I've ever seen out of a quarterback. His arm talent is just insane. He's just never been able to put it all together consistently. And he, again, is like Kirk Cousins in the sense of he has the talent and the ability to play like a top 10 quarterback when everything around him is perfect, from his weaponry to his coaching. Everything has to be perfect for Jared Goff to play like a top 10 quarterback. It's just, when you have a guy that everything needs to be perfect, that's what gets fans to think, all right, we need somebody to be better than that. Get somebody in there where it's like, things don't have to be perfect in order for them to succeed. And, you know, that's kind of what you get with Jared Goff as well as Kirk Cousins. And number 3 and number 4, I have Justin Fields at number 3 and Jordan Love at number 4. And this is very interesting. This one I say, like, These are the two upside guys that had the chance to overtake those guys as 1 and 2 in this division, and maybe even be two of the best quarterbacks in the league by year's end. I'll start off with Justin Fields first because he's the one getting the most hype. Came in as a rookie. The Bears traded up for him. Sort of very hit or miss as a rookie, as most raw rookie quarterbacks with all this athleticism usually are. And then he comes in his second year as the full-time starter, and he is electric on the ground. Like, if Justin Fields is going to be successful, a lot of it's going to be with his legs. He is so fun to watch when the play breaks down and he's able to get out into space. He's so much faster than I thought he was. Even back in his days at Ohio State, he didn't even look this fast. So that is a really, really fun to watch, and that's what gets Bears fans excited. It's the passing element of it all that is kind of concerning and is the one where we look at and we're like, okay, we need to see some serious improvement. And because he was one of the worst passing quarterbacks in the league statistically last year. So we need to see a big step up in that. And if we don't, there's a strong chance that the Chicago Bears might ultimately just end up moving on from Justin Fields if the passing game doesn't come along. And his arm talent, he has raw arm talent. It's just, he still struggles reading defenses properly. He still has a difficulty understanding when to throw and the elements of being a passer of the football, not just the thrower of it. So that is something that still has to come along for Justin Fields. Now, the Bears have set him up for success, and we'll talk about that later in this video. But it really is something to keep an eye on of, can he improve in the passing game element the same way Jalen Hurts did in year 3? We'll wait and see on that. And then Jordan Love, I'm just going to say this right now. I am sick and tired of all this Jordan Love hate that has just spread up in the offseason. Everyone's talking about Jordan Love and talking about him as if he's already a bust. Like, the wide assumption on Jordan Love is he's just going to be bad. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He's just automatically going to be bad because they spent a first-round pick on him, and then Aaron Rodgers was still there, and then he immediately won 2 league MVPs, and he's finally going to take the reins now. And like I said, people are just assuming he's going to be a terrible quarterback, and I can't understand for the life of me why. He was a first-round caliber talent in that 2020 draft class, a quarterback class that had guys like Burrow and Tua and Justin Herbert. He was in the lump with those guys. Now, not as highly touted as those guys, but he was still like, yeah, that's a first-round caliber quarterback. So I'm really sick of seeing people just shit on him just for the sake of shitting on him. If there's any one player that I hope just dominates and proves everyone wrong, it's Jordan Love, because that would be great. And also, Packers fans I know are spoiled as all hell. They dealt with, 15 years of Brett Favre, and then immediately another 15 years of Aaron Rodgers. And now you're potentially going to be looking at immediately another 10 to 15 years potentially with Jordan Love. It's just, man, Packers fans are spoiled, man. You talk about how Patriots fans are spoiled or Cowboys fans are spoiled. No, Packers fans are spoiled when it comes to the quarterback position. And Jordan Love has every ability in his being to be one of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL, especially the modern NFL. So that's the quarterback position, and now we are going to transition to the guys that are going to take the load off of not just the quarterbacks, but the passing game as a whole, and that is the running back position, where the Green Bay Packers are a clear number one to me. They have a really good running back duo here with Aaron Jones being the lead back. They were able to retain him. He was willing to take a pay cut to stay here and clear up some cap space, clear up some money, and honestly, that was a win for the Packers because he is, at this moment in time, arguably their best offensive piece and definitely their most established one. Aaron Jones, I feel like, doesn't get the respect of being viewed as one of the elite running backs in the NFL, at least not from a mainstream standpoint, but he is one of the more complete backs you will see in the NFL. great out of the backfield as a receiver, and not just as out of the backfield. Like, they will have him go out wide, put him in the slot, put him outside, have him run routes, and he is effective at that. There was a point where, like, the first half of all last year, before Christian Watson came along finally, Aaron Jones was that team's best wide receiver for the first half of the year. And, I mean, you saw it in his ability. He had excellent route running that you wouldn't expect from a running back. And then as a runner of the football, has a lot more power than people would expect. He's very elusive, very slippery of an athlete. He is so fun to watch, and the fact that they were able to retain him was a huge W for this organization. And then A.J. Dillon right behind him didn't have as good of a year last year as I would have hoped, being the number 2 back. You know, ever since he's come into the league, he was a part of that 2020 draft class that everyone just shat on the Packers for. He was drafted in the 2nd round, and, you know, he's been just a really solid number 2 power back. In a lot of ways, kind of like the perfect complement to Aaron Jones. You know, Aaron Jones is more of like a scat back with great receiving ability. Aaron Jones is more of like that bruiser, not really much of a threat out of the backfield as far as a receiver goes. So he is the perfect complement, but, you know, last year was a bit of a downtick for him, which was kind of unfortunate. So hopefully he gets back to the A.J. Dillon as he was his first couple of years, which is just a really good, reliable number 2 running back. And then he moved down the list, and it's the Detroit Lions at number 2. And this position from the offseason was very polarizing because they let go of Jamal Williams, which I was stunned by. You know, I was convinced that they were going to keep him around strictly from even if they didn't think he was like as worthy of a player, they had to have kept him around at least for a cultural standpoint. Like, he was just, you saw it on Hard Knocks last year. He's just a great guy for that culture. They let him walk in the offseason, and they bring in David Montgomery. Now, I don't hate the move because I think David Montgomery is a better player than Jamal Williams was. But, yeah, it was a shame that they just let that locker room presence leave. And bringing in a new guy, though I think Jamal Williams can easily play that, David Montgomery can play that Jamal Williams role and play it even better than Jamal Williams did. So I think that's a really good replacement if you had to let Jamal Williams walk. David Montgomery is basically just a souped-up version of Jamal Williams. And then we get to the number 2 running back, which is Jahmyr Gibbs. And, you know, those of you who were with me during my NFL draft stream know what my initial reaction was when they made this pick. You know, I'm one of these people where I'm like very adamant against drafting running backs in the first round unless they were like a Bijan Robinson level talent coming out. And Jahmyr Gibbs wasn't that. He was a really good player coming out of Alabama, and, you know, I do think he was like worthy of like, hey, if you get into like the last 5 picks of the first round and you don't really have any other needs, and it's like, all right, take a running back, who cares? Taking him with the 12th overall pick in the draft after you already traded down and you had a second first round pick. Nobody was looking for Jahmyr Gibbs between picks 11 and pick 16. Like, nobody was looking for a running back, let alone Jahmyr Gibbs in that frame. So what was the problem with just taking him, or just taking the 18th overall pick you had, trading back to the back end of the first round and taking him there? Why'd you have to take him with the 12th overall pick? And then you saw like all the reports about how they really wanted Jahmyr Gibbs, and teams around the league were saying like the Lions really wanted him and they were scared someone was going to leapfrog him, and that they were prepared apparently to take him as high as 6th. You're telling me they loved Jahmyr Gibbs so much, even more so than Bijan Robinson, that they were going to take Jahmyr Gibbs not only over Bijan, but take him at 6? He better be the greatest running back I've ever seen. Like, he better be Barry Sanders 2.0 if they think that highly of him. And that's not to shit on Jahmyr Gibbs as a player. Like I said, I love the player. He's so fast. He's he's a really great receiving back, really shifty, really good scat back. It's just a top 15 pick. Really? Why? To this day, I still don't understand it. Even if Jahmyr Gibbs ends up being really good, I'm still going to be like, that was still poor process. And then you get to number 3 with the Minnesota Vikings. And I am very curious to see how Alexander Mattison performs this year now that he's going to be officially taking the workload full time. Because, he's been the perfect number 2 back behind Dalvin Cook ever since Dalvin Cook was here. They cut Dalvin in the offseason, which was a really shocking move. And they're doing so with the confidence that Alexander Mattison, who basically is a Dalvin Cook clone, like not just in play style, but also physically, they're like these same sort of short, stout, buff guys with dreadlocks, and they play extremely similar. Like they're both like these shifty power backs with some decent receiving ability. Like they are, I'm not kidding when I say Alexander Mattison is a Dalvin Cook clone. So they're hoping that he can give him the same kind of production that Dalvin Cook can. But that's still a question mark because, some guys are better as number 2 backs than they are as full-time starters. And, that's a big risk, just letting a guy like Dalvin Cook walk even after a supposed down year, to just let a guy like that walk in favor of a guy that's never taken the full-time reps as the number 1 back before. So there is some, I like Alexander Mattison, the player. It's a wait and see on can he carry that workload. And then Kene Nwangu is the number 2 back right now. I don't know much about him as a runner. He's an excellent return man, excellent in the kickoff return game. I think actually was elected to a Pro Bowl last year as a kick returner. So we know what he is as a return man. It's just, I don't know what he can be as a pure runner of the football. That's sort of a wait and see. And then the Chicago Bears at 4th. And it's mainly just because it's sort of like this is the definition of a high floor, low ceiling sort of group. Khalil Herbert is good. I like Khalil Herbert. He's sort of like that short, shifty guy with great long speed. And then Deontay Foreman, a veteran who's bounced around from team to team, was drafted by the Houston Texans, played well his rookie year, got injured, got cut, went to Tennessee, played in relief of Derrick Henry, then went to Carolina last year and played well in the second half of the season for that Panthers team that played better than most people expected to. And now he's here in Chicago, and Deontay Foreman's one of those guys where it's like you see flashes when he plays and you're like, yeah, he can play in this league, but he's not good enough to be a number 1 back. So that really what it is just they're both really good, solid backs. And I don't even want to say they make sense together because, they're just sort of fine. There's better options to have in the league. There's better running back rooms in the league, but you're not upset of Deontay Foreman and Khalil Herbert as your 2 starting runners. And then you get to the receiving cores, and these are always very fascinating to talk about, especially in this division. Obviously, number 1 is the Minnesota Vikings, and that's mainly because of Justin Jefferson, who, I think we all know this, Justin Jefferson is the best receiver in football. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and if you try and dispute it, I'm sorry, I just think you're wrong. Justin Jefferson is the most complete receiver in the NFL he's not even like the most physically talented guy. That's the weirdest thing. Like, whenever you see these guys who are established as the best receiver in the leagues, you look at your guys in the past like D-Hop or Devontae Adams, these guys that were not like the most physically gifted players per se. Justin Jefferson's kind of like that. He's not the fastest guy in the world. He's not even like the most physically gifted guy. He's sort of just like tall and lanky, not the super like freak of an athlete, but he's an incredible route runner, has fucking stones for hands, will catch like he's one of those players that you throw it, his catch radius is insane. He's one of those rare players where you throw it anywhere in his vicinity and 99.9% of the time he will come down with the football. It is one of the most special things I've ever seen. And the fact that the Vikings keep looking into these generational talents and, not doing anything with them in their primes is just sort of like, it's always irritating me. You look at Moss, Adrian Peterson, hopefully Justin Jefferson doesn't get lumped in with those guys as far as their primes being wasted. But Justin Jefferson is the best receiver in the NFL, and I genuinely think it'll be a long, long time till that crown is stripped away from him. And then Jordan Addison's in the perfect spot. They drafted him in the first round this year at a USC. Jordan Addison had a great year at his last year at Pitt in 2021, then transferred from Pitt to USC. Still was really productive, but not as good as he was at Pitt. And, coming in, he had a lot of hype, and he sort of had a really disappointing combine performance that scared a lot of people away of whether or not they thought Jordan Addison could be a legit number one receiver. I didn't think so because, he wasn't that fast. He was sort of like, he's like 6'1", but also kind of lanky a little bit. And he had some consistency issues that you saw on tape from a route running and hands perspective. So there were reasonable question marks around Jordan Addison. But as a number two receiver, if he's in a situation, I said, with a great number one receiver and he could be the number two, that'd be the perfect spot. And there is no perfect spot in the league for Jordan Addison better than Minnesota. I said, he needs a great number one receiver to take the load off of him. You know what you do? You pair him with Justin fucking Jefferson. So Jordan Addison, I wouldn't be shocked if he'd be in rookie of the year consideration because he's going to get a lot of targets. He's going to get a lot of looks because every team's going to be scared shitless of Justin Jefferson. And he's going to be really good in this team. And I am so excited to see how he performs. And also what that does, drafting Jordan Addison, it also keeps KJ Osborne as your number three. The fear was KJ Osborne would come in after they released Adam Thielen in the offseason, that KJ Osborne was now going to step in as the team's number two, and there was concerns of how that would go. He was an excellent number three, but how would he feel taking over number two receiver role, taking over the number two receiver role? There we go. Finally got that out of there. But with the drafting of Jordan Addison, you now don't have to worry about that. He can do just as much as Jordan Addison could do. He's a very good route runner, underrated contested catch guy, has decent speed. He has a lot of traits. It's just, can he have enough traits in him to take over as a number two receiver? But like I said, you don't have to worry about that now. Unless Jordan Addison ends up being a bust, and now it's all right, KJ, let's see what you can do as the number two. And then TJ Hawkinson is the starting tight end here. They got him in a midseason trade from Detroit, one of the rare interdivision trades. And TJ Hawkinson, he's sort of been underrated ever since he's gotten to the league. He's a tight end from Iowa, so he's just a big physical meathead. So, and he's played well back in his days in Detroit. And then when they traded him in the middle of the trade deadline, I was shocked. And he's come into Minnesota and kind of hasn't skipped a beat. He's not the most physically talented guy in the world as far as from an athletic standpoint. And he's not among the elites as far as tight ends go, not even close. But he still is just this reliable, good receiving tight end who's a really good run blocker. And he is sort of like the perfect cherry on top of this whole receiving corps. And then number two is the Chicago Bears. And this might surprise some people that I had the Bears ranked as number two in this division. That's because they would not be in this spot had they not gotten DJ Moore in the offseason. And when they got the number one overall pick and they were shopping it around to QB needy teams, the fact that they were able to not only get the draft haul that they got from the Carolina Panthers, but also get DJ Moore out of it, was such a genius and incredible move by Ryan Poles to say, hey, he looked at all these other young developing quarterbacks from the past couple of years. Josh Allen didn't really take off until he got Stephon Diggs out of the building. Jalen Hurts didn't really take off until he got A.J. Brown in the building. They're hoping getting DJ Moore in the building is going to help Justin Fields, maybe help in his development in the passing game and get him over the hump. And he has the ability to do it. DJ Moore is probably the most underrated receiver in the NFL right now. He's the total package. Great route runner, great hands, great speed, great separation. He has every tool imaginable to be an alpha number one wide receiver in the same conversation as your Stephon Diggs. It's just nobody's really talking about it because he's been stashed away on a bad Panthers team for most of his time in the league. So nobody really knows who he is. But here in a bigger market in Chicago, with Justin Fields throwing the football with as much excitement as there is around him, he should finally get the recognition that he gratefully deserves. And that helps make Chase Claypool your number 2 receiver and Darnell Mooney, put him in the slot as basically your third option. And that really makes it takes it from a below average receiving core to all right, now we're cooking with gas a little bit here. Chase Claypool is sort of disappointing to me. I loved him coming out of Notre Dame, and I loved him the first half of his rookie year. You know, when he was getting his nickname was Mapletron, and people comparing him to Calvin Johnson because of how physically gifted he was, and he was just dominating teams in his rookie year. It was so fun to watch. And then, character issues started popping up. His production started to dip a little bit. He had some maturity issues to the point where the Pittsburgh Steelers were just like, you know what, we're done. And they traded him to Chicago for a second-round pick. And, he comes to Chicago and sort of disappears a little bit. And I'm hoping that he gets back to what he was as a rookie, or at least better than he was as a rookie. Because if he is able to get back his groove a little bit, and he's able to play like rookie Chase Claypool, which he's going to have the ability to do now that teams aren't focused on him, like I said, man, you're cooking with gas. And then Darnell Mooney, who used to be this team's number 1 wide receiver for a while, is now resulted as basically the slot number 3. And that's a great role for him. Putting him in the slot full-time and just having him match up on slot corners and safeties and just running by everybody because he is a really shifty route runner. He does have great speed after the catch. He's just not talented enough to be any team's number 1. But as a number 2 option or a third in the slot, that's perfect for him. That's why I said the addition of DJ Moore was so vital for this team. And then Cole Kmet is your starting tight end. He's just fine. He is average. He's very adequate as a starting tight end. Has improved a lot in the receiving game. Improved a lot since he's coming into the league as a blocker. He is a bigger body guy. But I will say he is the definition. He is the reason when he got his contract extension where I was like, you know what? Maybe the running backs in the league have a point. Because as much as I think Cole Kmet is a fine player, he's not worth the 4-year, $50 million contract that the Bears gave him. That I just thought was absolutely ridiculous that they paid him that much money. So that I don't understand. But what he is, he's fine. But that contract could be really bad looking depending on how that goes. And then number 3 in this is the Detroit Lions. And I felt like they could have done more with this group. Now, it is noted that Jameson Williams is not listed here. He is suspended for the first 6 games because of gambling. So he's not going to be available for this team for a good quarter of the season. So as a result, you're going into the first 6 weeks of the season with Josh Reynolds essentially being your number 1 receiver on the outside. Now, Josh Reynolds, he's sort of like this solid ball-winning type. not the fastest guy, not the greatest route runner, but he's a good enough athlete to win on 50-50 jump balls. He's followed Jared Goff around back to his days when they were both in LA for the Rams, and they both now are here in Detroit, so they have a lot of rapport with each other, so that's at least good. And yeah, it's just he's Josh Reynolds. It's sort of like, you're desperately waiting for Jameson Williams to come back. And then they bring back Marvin Jones, who went to Jacksonville, and was here in Detroit for a long time, left for a contract with the Jaguars. He's now back in Detroit, and he's just here from a veteran standpoint. He's not the football player he once was. He used to be a really good receiver for a while, but he's gotten up there in age. He's lost some of his athletic ability. And he's just here, I think, just from a pure leadership standpoint and depth, really, where it's like you're not relying on him to really give you much from a production standpoint. But again, for the first 6 weeks of the season, you kind of have to, because Jameson Williams got popped for fucking gambling. So you have to rely on him at least for the first 6 weeks. After that, it's like, hey, Marvin, just mentor these young guys and just try and get them on the right track, help them get more ingrained with the culture, and we'll be good. And then we get to the slot with Amon-Ra St. Brown, who, Justin Jefferson, I said, is the best receiver in football, best all-around receiver in football. Amon-Ra St. Brown is the best slot receiver in football. And again, to me, it's not even close. He is such a great route runner in short areas. He has such great short area quickness and burst, reliable hands, really underrated after the catch. He is the perfect scheme fit and culture fit. Yeah, I can't imagine a situation where they don't give him an extension when it's come due. He is just the perfect Detroit Lion in the modern NFL right now. And then the tight end position is Sam Laporta, who, like I said, they traded TJ Hawkinson in the middle of last season, and they had their first pick in the second round. That was the 34th overall pick, I believe, and they spent it on Sam Laporta. I was underwhelmed by it, especially considering at the time you had guys like Darnell Washington and Luke Musgrave that were still on the board that I thought were significantly better players. They end up going with Sam Laporta, which, I mean, hey, they went down this route before with the Iowa tight end. They were like, hey, it was pretty much successful for us last time. Why not just go back down the well? I'm not upset at it, but, Sam Laporta is obviously not the prospect TJ Hawkinson was coming out. In fact, he's sort of a downgrade in that regard. He's a fine athlete. Again, nothing too crazy, but hey, I don't hate the idea of just drafting an Iowa tight end if you're in need of one. And then you get to the Green Bay Packers, and this might be controversial because people are like, well, they think the Packers have a better core than the Bears or even the Lions at this moment in time. And you're right. I do think they have the potential to be that. It's just very unproven. Christian Watson, I'm so happy he came on late at the end of last season. The first half of his rookie year was brutal. He had obviously that egregious drop on the first play of the season last year, and he couldn't catch a football for the first 8 weeks of the season. And then all of a sudden, on a Sunday night game or a primetime game against the Dallas Cowboys, I think it was, he just goes off with 3 touchdown receptions. And then ever since then, he was playing like a man caught on fire. He was just lighting teams up, and all of a sudden, it was like he had figured it out. He had figured out how to be a route runner. He got more consistent. You could tell he got on the jugs machine because his hands were more reliable. He was coming down with more contested catch situations. His drops were almost completely cleaned up by that point. And he was just so fun to watch after the catch. He's a big body guy with legit 4.3 speed, and it showed constantly. I expect him to improve even more this year with Jordan Love. Jordan Love's going to look at Christian Watson and be like, all right, you are my best friend right now. You and I are going to be best friends, and we're going to rip this shit up. And they have all the ability to be so. And I'm really excited to see how Christian Watson improves on how he played at the latter half of last year. And then Romeo Doubs is a solid number 2. Packers fans really like Romeo Doubs. And I understand why they do, but, it's sort of like a what you see is what you get from him. If you're expecting him to develop more and be like this high upside guy, he's not. He's not really all that fast. He's a solid route runner with solid hands, reliable at times during contested catch situations, but that's pretty much all. He's a really good number two. He's fine. It's just there's better options out there for number two wide receivers. And then Jayden Reed, I freaking loved Jayden Reed in the pre-draft process. He was a Senior Bowl darling where he just went to the Senior Bowl and was lighting guys up. Excellent route runner, incredible hands. He was one of the best deep threats in college football last year, despite playing for a Michigan State team that really didn't do much as far as the passing game is concerned. And, Jayden Reed is a nice change of pace because the Packers have always had their type at receiver. These big, tall, big body receivers that are not the fastest guys, but they're sort of like good run blockers and good contested catch guys. And Jayden Reed is not the opposite of that, but from a stature standpoint, he's the opposite. He's about like barely 5'10", fast as the wind. He's so electric in space when he has the ball in his hands. And, it's a really nice situation where it's a good change of pace and they needed it because he is the perfect complement for them. And like I said, this is an upside group. If they hit on their upside, sky's the limit. And then they draft Luke Musgrave in the second round. And a lot of Packers fans wanted Darnell Washington, but Luke Musgrave is a really good player in his own right. Really great athlete, really good as a receiver, underrated as a run blocker, though he will have some ugly losses at times. But he's another guy where it's like you're hitting on upside, and if he hits his upside in this offense, like I said, this could be very quickly one of the better receiving groups in the league, and all of them are on rookie contracts. Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs were drafted last year. Jayden Reed and Luke Musgrave were drafted this year. These are all guys that are going to be together for at least the next 4 or 5 years. So this is going to be a really fascinating situation, how this group develops with Jordan Love, and I'm really, really excited to see it. And now let's move to the offensive line units for these teams. And there is a clear number one in my eyes, and that is the Detroit Lions. And this is by far one of the best offensive line units in all of football. This Lions offense, this is what is going to make this Lions offense go. This is what this team was built around, was this offensive line. The whole culture around the Detroit Lions is we got to be nasty, the knee-biting mentality of being nasty, beating the shit out of people. And this offensive line perfectly captures that culture. Starting with Taylor Decker, he is a bit of a taller tackle, but he's still one of the best left tackles in the NFL. Despite being, 6'7", which most 6'7" offensive linemen, aren't really that consistent or that great because of their height. They will lose a lot of leverage games. But Taylor Decker's not one of those guys. He's very consistent, incredible pass protector, really good run blocker. And they locked him up a few years ago on a long-term deal, and he is one of the underrated tackles in all of football, and he should get his notoriety because he is incredible. And then Jonah Jackson, who's weirdly enough sort of the weak link of this group. And if Jonah Jackson is your weak link, then that's how you know you're living pretty, because he is, kind of inconsistent as a pass protector. He's sort of average at times, also really good. He is a dickhead as a run blocker, so he is really fun. And again, if he's your weak link, that's the best case scenario. And Frank Ragnow is still a top 3, if not top 2 center in the NFL. He's incredibly smart, really good pass protector, excellent run blocker. He is the guy that keeps everything moving. He has been here for so long now. He's not the best center in the league anymore, but he was for a long time and is still an elite player at his position. And they get Graham Glasgow back after he left for a year to go to Denver. He was in Detroit for a long time, left. He's now back. He's just great veteran presence to have. He's not the great player. He's not the great athlete that he once was, but he's still a very good player. And if it's a situation where, Hal Vaitai is still here, he's been dealing with injuries, and if he comes back and he's healthy, best situation is Hal Vaitai moves in at right guard, and Graham Glasgow is like the best sixth man in the league. That's probably the best case scenario. But even then, if Graham Glasgow's starting, you're not complaining about that whatsoever because he still is athletic enough to be a starting caliber guard in the NFL. And then Penei Sewell is emerging as one of the best right tackles in the NFL. He was highly touted coming out of Oregon. He was a left tackle at Oregon. They moved him over to the right side, and there was people that were nervous about whether or not he could perform on the right side because that happens a lot where like guys are more comfortable performing on one side of the line rather than the other. And there was worries that Penei Sewell was going to be that, and it hasn't been like that. In his rookie year, he dealt with some lumps, but nothing you were concerned about. And then in year 2, he really was like, yeah, he felt more comfortable with it. He felt more comfortable with the technique. He was a rock-solid pass protector. He was deleting dudes in the run game. Penei Sewell is he's just an absolute freak of nature, man. This offensive line just in general is just unbelievable that they were able to pull this together and construct this. This is just insane. And then number 2 is the Green Bay Packers. And, this is another polarizing group because you have David Bakhtiari still at left tackle after all these years is still there. And some people are saying he's on the downtick of his career. He has had injury issues these past couple of seasons. But when he's played, when he's actually been out there, he's still one of the premier pass protecting left tackles in the NFL. Sort of good as a run blocker still at his age, but as a pass protector, he's just as great as he ever was. It's just, he's had trouble staying out there and staying healthy is all. But when he's out there, he's still the David Bakhtiari we all know and love. And then Elton Jenkins in at left guard, where he is at his best, though he is really good when they play him at tackle. Last year he had some up and downs at tackle, but at guard, he's the most underrated guard in the NFL, in my opinion, because, most people, when they think of guards, they think of guys like Quentin Nelson, these big maulers, and Elton Jenkins isn't necessarily like that. He's just incredibly technically sound and consistent as all hell, and he is sort of the perfect complement to Bakhtiari on that left side. And then Josh Myers at center, they spent a second-round pick on him a couple of years ago, which was kind of surprising. And he's come in, and he's just been really solid because the Green Bay Packers, they know how to develop these late-round offensive linemen. So, Josh Myers has come in, and he's been a solid starting center. Nothing too crazy or nothing really much else to say about him. He's just been decent, reliable, solid. John Runyon he's another one of these underrated guys where he's not the best pass protector in the world, but he's another one of these, just dickhead of run blockers, and he's a pain in the ass to deal with, as a run blocker. He's just very solid in that regard. And then Zach Tom was, another draft darling from last year's draft. They drafted him in the middle rounds, and was sort of like their sixth man last year, got some sparing playing time, and then as the season went on, he was put in as a starting tackle and played very, very well. And they're rocking with him as their full-time right tackle this year, which I think would be best for him. And there's a potential where this is a really good offensive lineman that's going to help keep Jordan Love upright. And then number 3 is the Minnesota Vikings. And this, a very up and down group. You're happy with your tackles. Brian O'Neill on your right side, Christian Darrisaw on the left side. You are more than comfortable with that tackle duo. It's just the inside is very, blah. It starts with Garrett Bradbury, he's a very solid center, very good starting caliber center. Ezra Cleveland has sort of had an up and down career, had some ugly games, but also had some really good ones. Ed Ingram, who they drafted last year, is just sort of really bad. Like, he is really, really bad. The fact that they don't have a guard better than him on the roster is just weird to me. They have to play Ed Ingram, but he's just really, really putrid as a pass protector. As a run blocker, he's fine, but as a pass protector, he is just horrific. And then you get to the Chicago Bears at number 4. Braxton Jones is a solid left tackle. He's not even remotely the tackles that are in this division, not even close, but he played really well as a late round rookie last year. He's very technically sound, very, not the most insane athlete in the world, but you're happy with him as your starting left tackle. And he's kind of the reason why they chose to draft Darnell Wright as high as they did. I thought there were better tackles available than Darnell Wright, but, Braxton Jones is the reason why they drafted a right tackle instead of a left tackle, and Darnell Wright is more comfortable playing on the right side, though he has been very insistent that he can play on the left side. Right tackle was where he had his best tape. That was the tape where everyone was raving about him because he went up against Alabama, Will Anderson, and he just stopped Will Anderson in his tracks, and that's what got a lot of people excited about Darnell Wright coming out of Tennessee. And, I just felt like it was a little too high for him. I definitely thought he was a first-round talent for sure, but I thought a top 10 pick was a little too rich for him. But not to say that he's a bad player. I actually think he's going to be a very good player, especially if he is going to be still on the right side. I think he'll be a very good to solid player in the NFL for a long time for sure. And then Tevin Jenkins is going to be playing at left guard, and he has now played officially every position on the offensive line except for center. Tevin Jenkins, I don't know what's happened with Tevin Jenkins, where, he was such a great prospect and such an asshole of a player coming out of Oklahoma State. Like, he had some of the best and most fun run blocking tape I've ever seen from an offensive lineman. And, he just hasn't been able to stick at one position, and he hasn't been as dominant as we had maybe expected him to be. I still think he could be a really good player for a long time, but, I thought he was going to be this great Pro Bowl level player, and he still can as a guard because he is such a great run blocker. But, it's sort of a wait and see on that regard. Cody White here is a below average to average starting center, and Nate Davis, they brought in the offseason. It's just a solid guard and nothing really much else. Now let's transition from the offensive side of the ball to the defensive side of the ball. And number 1 is going to be the Green Bay Packers. And I just want to clarify by saying that I'm ranking the Packers, their position groups on defense on paper. I know they're not going to be actually that good because Joe Barry just doesn't know how to be a good defensive coordinator for some reason. So I'm ranking these guys just purely on paper. And on paper, the Packers' defensive line is better than any of these other 3 in this division. Starting with the headliner, which is Rashawn Gary. Rashawn Gary got a lot of hate when he first got drafted in the first round. Many people didn't even know who he was. But, as he's gotten starts and as he's gotten more reps under his belt, he has proven to be one of the best and most consistent edge rushers in the NFL and one of the best shit wreckers. Like, he's on, I will say this, he's on that Micah Parsons level. He's on that Nick Bosa level as a guy that he's the one guy that could just completely destroy an offensive game plan. He is one of those guys, and he showed that last year, and then he got hurt in the middle of last year and missed the rest of the season. So he's going to come back healthy, hopefully play a full season. And if he does, I would not be shocked if people will officially put Rashawn Gary in that Nick Bosa and Micah Parsons conversation as the best pass rushers in the NFL. And then opposite of him is Preston Smith, who's a veteran. He's up there in age, but he's still really consistent all around. Consistent run blocker, consistent pass rusher. He's just very good. He's the ideal number two. That's all I'll say about that. And Kenny Clark is still one of the best interior players in the NFL, especially as a pass rusher. He's just an excellent pass rusher. Can play the run, though he hasn't been asked to, that much despite being a three tech. But he is still one of the best pass rushing defensive tackles in the NFL. And he's been so for a while in Green Bay, and I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. And Devontae Wyatt is finally going to be a full-time starter going into this year. They were playing guys like Dean Lowry over him, which never made sense to me because they spent a first-round pick on Devontae Wyatt, and he had the physical tools coming out of Georgia. And you saw it last year when he actually was able to go out there. He was able to get off blocks and get after the passer. He has the ability, and he finally is going to be able to start full-time this year. And I'm really excited to see what Devontae Wyatt, taking full-time starter reps, what he can really become. And then TJ Slayton is listed as the team's starting nose tackle. And to be honest, I don't know a ton about TJ Slayton. So, big body nose tackle, space eater. For this defensive line, it makes sense. Number 2 is the Minnesota Vikings, and thank God, this team better be thanking their lucky stars they were able to retain Danielle Hunter. Had some contract issues, had some issues about wanting to leave. They were able to convince him to stay, and thank God, because he is one of the freakier pass rushers in the league. So long, so big, so athletic, and has such great reach, has a million pass rush moves. He is the machine that keeps his defensive line going. And if they had lost him, then you're looking at a situation where a Marcus Davenport is your best pass rusher, which I like Marcus Davenport, but he just can't stay healthy for the life of him. They gave him a big contract in the offseason because of what he is when he's healthy. But it's, you're getting maybe 8 games out of him a year, which that's a bit of an issue with me. And then you get into the interior, and it's actually worse, Dean Lowry, who I mentioned, was on the Packers last year, and he's just sort of blah. Like, the fact they were starting him over Devontae Wyatt still doesn't make sense to me because he's just sort of like below average in everything. And Harrison Phillips is kind of the same thing where he's just sort of like a big space eater, and that's really it. It's just sort of blah. Same thing with Kairos Tonga, where he's just another big space-eating nose tackle, and really nothing as a pass rusher. So you're really not getting anything from your interior. So if you're going to try and get after the pass rusher, it's Danielle Hunter and the 9 games you get out of Marcus Davenport, and that's it. And then you get to number 3 with the Detroit Lions, and this is fascinating because there are a couple guys here that have upsides as pass rushers, and that's really it. And those guys are Aiden Hutchinson, who was just as advertised as a rookie last year. High floor, not the highest ceiling, but incredibly high floor guy, great character guy, great leader to have for this culture in this locker room. And he's just a very consistent, high motor, great power, consistently can get after the passer. He is the perfect Detroit Lion in a lot of ways. And then you have a Lee McNeil on the inside, who I liked Lee McNeil when they drafted him a couple years ago, and he slowly has come along, really good against the run, has really come along as a pass rusher as well. And I expect Lee McNeil to just keep improving as time goes on. And the other side of the line is just sort of blah. John Kaminsky, Isaiah Buggs, they're sort of, just sort of average, adequate starters, nothing too crazy. And then number 4 is the Chicago Bears, and this is just fucking putrid, man. Thank God they were able to at least acquire Yannick Ngakoue, because you were looking at a situation where DeMarcus Walker was set up to be this team's best pass rusher this year. And he was like a third-man rotational piece in Tennessee. And so, yeah, thank God they got Yannick Ngakoue. His hypes from his Jacksonville Jaguars days have, taken a complete nosedive. He went to the Raiders, was sort of fine there. Indianapolis, again, he was same thing. He was fine. He's not the player he once was in Jacksonville, but he's back to being this team's best pass rusher here in Chicago. We'll see if he's able to get back to that Jaguars form. Probably not, but hey, it's better than nothing. And then you get into the interior, Josh Jones is here. He's just sort of below average, and he's their best defensive tackle, and that's really bad. Andrew Billings is a big space-eating nose, and, nothing as a pass rusher. Good enough as a run defender, but yeah, this defensive line is legitimately one of the worst in the entire NFL. And it's weird, and it's kind of a nice transition to the linebacking core because, the Bears have one of the worst D-lines in the league, but one of the best linebacking groups in the league. First I want to start off with Jack Sanborn, who was an undrafted pickup last year, played really good for them last year. Really good as a coverage player, good enough as a run defender. He was a diamond in the rough for them last year. They didn't really need to break the bank on the linebacking core like they did because of what they got out of Jack Sanborn. But they did, and holy hell, I'll start with Tremaine Edmunds because he's the big name from that big influx of free agents they got. And Tremaine Edmunds, he's still young, man. He's still, 26 years old and still developing. Remember, he was 19 years old when he came into the NFL, and he's still developing, man, which is weird. But, he really came along for the Buffalo Bills last year as, a coverage player and a run defender, and he's really just emerged as one of the better linebackers in the NFL. And I should only expect him to continue to improve here in Chicago. And then they also signed TJ Edwards from the Philadelphia Eagles. And he's sort of like a similar player to Jack Sanborn, but with higher athletic upside. Incredibly smart player, willing run defender, willing zone defender. These two guys sort of play off each other. TJ Edwards is the perfect complement to Tremaine Edmunds, where Edmunds is more of that willing zone defender. He's much better against the pass, whereas TJ Edwards is much more of a physical thumper, and he's willing to go downhill and just light up guys, but he's not the best in pass coverage. So it really is a perfect complement of skill sets. And then you get to number 2 with the Green Bay Packers, and Devondre Campbell sort of took a bit of a downtick last year from his 2021 season, and the season where he played really well and they felt comfortable giving him that 5-year contract. And, didn't play as well as he did in 2021, but still was really good for them last year. And he's sort of their best linebacker right now. And their number 2 at the moment is Quay Walker, who I was stunned that they drafted in the first round last year. Especially with the 22nd overall pick, where most people had him as a late second, third round prospect. And they spent a first round pick on him. And last year, look, he has the thumping mentality. He's not afraid to go downhill and hit somebody. But, he doesn't know what he's looking at in coverage. He's very inconsistent as a run defender. He has that sort of Tasmanian devil mindset where he's going somewhere to hit something. He doesn't know where he's going, but he's going to hit something. And, he has... You saw it last year in games. He has character issues of controlling his emotions, doing the dumbest shit that's gotten him ejected from games. It's... Quay Walker's got to come along and get mature, and he's got to do it fast. That's all I'll say about that. And then the Detroit Lions at number 3. And Alex Anzalone is still here. Honestly, I don't know why the Lions like him so much. It has to be a locker room thing because Anzalone is not that good of a player. I argue that he's actually kind of a bad player at times. So I have no idea why they like him so much, but they do. And then, the Lions, I talked about the Jahmyr Gibbs, how that didn't make sense, especially from a value standpoint. Spending their second first-round pick on a linebacker in Jack Campbell was also all right, do y'all really know how to use your resources properly? But Jack Campbell, is sort of a Dan Campbell guy in a lot of ways, where he's the big old school linebacker, 6'5", north of 230 pounds. They don't make him this big anymore. And he is sort of that old school linebacker where he's like a willing run defender. He's going to come down and he's going to hit something. He's a very smart player. So he does fit the scheme and he is a culture fit. But again, it's like, why spend a first round pick on him? And then Charles Harris is just the definition of average. Has some athletic tools to him. Can rush the passer a little bit, but nothing really much else after that. And then you get to number 4 with the Minnesota Vikings. And Vikings fans, from this point out, and this defense is going to get really, really brutal. And it starts with this linebacking core where their best linebacker at the moment is Jordan Hicks. And, he has definitely lost some of his athleticism that he used to have. Not the pass defender he once was, not the run defender he once was. He's definitely on the downside of his career. And then Brian Asamoah, who they drafted last year in the middle of the draft, he didn't really get much reps last year at linebacker because they had Eric Kendricks here. And that's another thing where they lose Eric Kendricks, who's still one of the better linebackers in the NFL. Losing him is huge because now you're starting an unproven commodity in Brian Asamoah, who has some athletic upside, but hasn't gotten a lot of reps, so we don't know what he looks like for sure. And then last but certainly not least, we are moving on to the secondaries for these teams. And number 1 is the Detroit Lions. Despite the fact that Emmanuel Moseley is their number 1 corner at the moment, I like Emmanuel Moseley. They got him in free agency from the 49ers. Really solid corner, really good starting caliber corner all around. I don't know how I feel about him being the number 1 corner here, but, he's fine. He has some athleticism to it, so in theory, he could, live up to the challenge, but it's a wait and see for him. And then, on opposite of him is Cameron Sutton, who they got from the Steelers, another free agent addition. And, this is where I'm like, they could have done so much more with this corner room, and I feel like they did want to do more with it. They traded, Jeff Okudah in the offseason to the Atlanta Falcons. And I felt like they did that with the anticipation they were going to draft Devin Witherspoon. And obviously they missed out on Witherspoon. And then they proceeded to not really draft a corner in the early rounds. So this you're rocking with as your starting corners. And they're both good, solid corners with good athletic upside. It's just, can they hold up in those roles is all I'm saying. C.J. Gardner-Johnson does have experience playing corner on the outside. He's more so as like a nickel and a safety, but was a really good player in New Orleans, really good for an Eagles team last year that made it to the Super Bowl, and should be another excellent player here in Detroit. And then you get to these safeties, and this is probably the most underrated safety duo in the league, in my opinion. Tracy Walker is an excellent free safety, great athlete, great range, willing run defender, and Kirby Joseph as the strong safety might actually be a better football player than Tracy Walker. He was a ball hawk for this team last year. He was a willing run defender. Kirby Joseph has quickly emerged as one of my favorite players in the NFL, and I won't be shocked by years end he's considered as one of the elite safeties in the league for sure. He definitely played like it last year. And then number 2 is the Green Bay Packers. And again, if they had a better defensive coordinator than Joe Barry that actually knew how to deploy these guys, I would actually put the Packers as my number 1 secondary. But I know they're going to be held back, so I have to rank them as number 2 because of that. I just know the Lions secondary is going to be used better than the Packers will. But for the Packers, we'll start out with Jair Alexander, who's still one of the premier corners in the NFL. Anything you ask of him, he will do at an elite level. Elite man cover corner, elite zone cover corner, has an incredibly high IQ player. He is a legitimate top 3 corner in football. And if I'm the Packers, I would not let him go at any point for any reason whatsoever. And then Rasul Douglas is on the opposite side of him. He was another one of these diamond in the rough guys. They got off the street when nobody else wanted him. They got him off the street for cheap and came in and played really well in 2021. And then they extended him and played just as good, if not better, in 2022. He will have some losses, but he's a really good athlete, really sticky in coverage, and really smart player. Not the greatest athlete, but he's an excellent player who's really, really smart. And in a lot of ways, the perfect complement to Jair. And then Keyshawn Nixon is listed as the starting slot corner. I don't know how I feel about that because we haven't seen much of him as a pure corner. He has made some noise as a returner, but we don't know what he looks like as a corner, let alone a slot corner. So it's a wait and see on him. And then Rudy Ford is the starting safety, free safety that is he's in the same realm as Rasul Douglas, where he's like, he was a diamond in the rough guy, sort of bounced around, got him off the street for cheap, came in last year and played really, really well. He was like a godsend in a lot of ways in a safety room that was struggling because they didn't know how to replace Adrian Amos. So, he was a good pickup for them, but it's like, can he be like Rasul Douglas where he takes a little bit of a next step up? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. And then Darnell Savage is just taking a bit of a nosedive. I don't know what's happened with Darnell Savage. He played really well coming into the league, but these past couple seasons, it's almost like his confidence has been shot. I don't know what's happened with Darnell Savage, but hopefully he gets his mojo back because early on in his career, he was a really, really good safety for them. And then number 3 is the Chicago Bears, and this is another one of those groups where it's like the upside is beyond the sky. This has the potential, if all these guys hit on their upside, to be one of the best secondaries in the league. But, that's sort of a wait and see thing, and I can't rank them too high because that is just we're hoping they can be that. And it starts with Jalen Johnson, who he's one of the few established guys in this secondary. He's just a really good starting corner. Like, he's legit a top 15 corner in my eyes in the league at the moment. Really good athlete, good long speed, really sticky in man coverage. I expect him to take a tick up this year for sure. And then Tyreek Stevenson, who they drafted in the second round out of Miami, one of the more underrated corners in this past draft class. Everyone was talking about the top guys with, Witherspoon and Gonzalez and Banks. No one was really talking about Tyreek Stevenson, but he was probably the most technically sound out of any of those guys. And I think coming to Chicago, in Matt Eberflus's defense, I think he's going to get coached up properly, and I think it won't be long until he will reach his potential as being one of the most consistent, technically sound corners in football. And then Kyler Gordon is the slot, and I think that's at his best. They played him on the outside last year, and he didn't play well. But when they moved him into the slot, all of a sudden he looked more comfortable, and he performed much better there. So I think they're doing the smart thing by having him as the full-time slot corner because that really is his best. And this safety duo is really intriguing. Eddie Jackson, he, outside of the Fangio defense, is not the game-breaking safety he once was. But he's still an excellent safety all around. Really rangy, does have really good ball skills. He is still an excellent starting caliber safety. And then Jaquan Brisker is a guy they drafted last year out of Penn State. Incredibly physical run defender, good enough in coverage. He's a good complement to Eddie Jackson. And then we talk about this secondary for the Minnesota Vikings, and I'll talk about the two only good things. Byron Murphy, who they brought in the offseason, he's currently listed as their slot corner, which, he's probably best as a slot corner, honestly. He's a really good athlete, really sticky, has good long speed, which is why they feel comfortable placing him in the slot. And then Harrison Smith at strong safety, he's up there in age, has definitely lost a step in athleticism, but he's still a really good safety. And that's really it, because everything else in this group is putrid. This is legit probably the worst secondary in the NFL, at least as far as I've seen at this moment in time. Their two starting corners is a Caleb Evans, who I know basically nothing about, and then Mekhi Blackman, who's a rookie 4th-round pick out of USC, who has some traits but is incredibly raw. And that's your starting corners at the moment. And it's, oh man, it's brutal to look at. You know, this is one of the worst secondaries in the NFL last year, and I expect it to be the same. And then their starting free safety, Cam Bynum, is sort of just, it's decent athlete, but that's pretty much it. Like I said, this secondary is just brutal to look at. And I hate to end the video on this, but it's just, I hate this secondary for the Vikings. I expected them to address it more in the offseason, and they just outright ignored it. But that is going to put a wrap on the NFC North preview. Stay tuned over the next couple days. We will be getting to the Southern divisions, and I talked about how much of a struggle it was getting through that secondary for the Minnesota Vikings. Getting through these Southern divisions is going to be a task. So stick around for that. Those will be coming out in the next couple of days. But like I said, if you have not already, please like, subscribe, and share the video. And also to support me on Patreon if you'd like to. That link will be in the description down below. But with that being said, I'm Double Diesel. Peace.